And good afternoon. You're listening to Ken Hudnall. This is the Ken Hudnall Show. Coming to you from our studios right here in exciting El Paso, Texas. Gateway to the Old West and the most haunted city in the country. Well, today's May the 4th, the 124th day of this new year. Just 241 days remain to the year's over with. Do you know that May 4th is Star Wars Day and also International Firefighters Day? There's a lot of interesting things going on in the solar system. For example, Saturn is going into a 15-year period of darkness. If you are somebody who likes to view the stars through a telescope, what's normally a bright spot in the heavens is slowly fading away, and it'll be gone for the next, as I say, next 15 years. Let's see what we got in the news right now. Seattle's socialist mayor has been slammed for her dismissive attitude about tax-weary residents who are leaving the city. Basically, she said, don't let the door hit you on the way out. And she's part of that new socialist wave that seems to be gaining the upper hand in this country. The Washington Post editorial board Friday lambasted Seattle's socialist mayor, Katie Wilson, for dismissive comments regarding the city's exodus of wealthy residents and growing taxpayer frustration over soaring rates. The philosophy of the socialist is, which yours is mine. And everything they can grab, they're using to support the influx of undocumented immigrants that seems to be trying to take over this country. 9 days after winning Seattle's November mayoral election, Katie Wilson joined Starbucks baristas on a picket line, pledged to boycott the coffee conglomerate until the union got its way. The socialists will need to wait a little while longer for a caffeine fix. The board wrote in a scathing piece titled "Seattle's Mayor Waves Goodbye to Prosperity." And she seems to feel that her attitude is the proper one to have. If you're not pro-socialist, I don't suggest moving to Seattle. The editorial that was published highlighted the shifting business landscape, noting recent Starbucks stores closures and the Coffee John's announcement of a major expansion in Nashville, Tennessee, a move that's going to shift 2,000 jobs away from the Pacific Northwest. The board specifically pointed to Washington Governor Bob Ferguson's new millionaire's tax that imposes a 9.9% rate on annual incomes exceeding $1 million. So in the new socialist world that seems to be coming to the fore, doing a good job and really succeeding is now a bad thing. Well, dying former Congressman Barney Frank tells the Democrats their far-left messaging is costing them voters. Former Congressman Barney Frank warned on Sunday that Democrats are going too far to the left while dying in a hospice of congestive heart failure in Maine. He's 86, was a liberal stalwart who fought to legalize same-sex marriage and helped pass the Dodd-Frank the Wall Street regulations after the 2008 financial crash. He said he wouldn't get to marriage until after the other things had been resolved, he said on CNN, State of the Union. He said, and that's what I'm suggesting we do today. The analogy is males and female transsexuals playing sports that are for women. He's set to release a new book criticizing the far left wing of the Democratic Party. He claims they've neglected more pressing issues like economic inequality, and instead they push more progressive causes. Former lawmaker warns Democrats to be more strategic about pushing for far-left issues. They don't seem to understand that a lot of people are not in favor of it. In fact, the majority of the American citizens are not in favor of it. But they keep pushing. Well, there is a proposed semi-automatic ban that's left millions of legal firearm owners in limbo in Rhode Island. They believe that their assault weapons ban should become the U.S. gun seizure blueprint. They're pushing a sweeping gun ban that could set off alarm bells for far beyond the ocean state. The latest proposal, SB 2710, would outlaw the possession of some of the most commonly owned firearms in America. They've targeted semi-automatic rifles, pistols, and shotguns that millions of law-abiding citizens rely on for self-defense, sport, and tradition. What makes this proposal especially alarming is not just how it bans, but how it leaves enforcement hanging in the air. The bill is conspicuously silent on how the state intends to deal with currently owned firearms that suddenly become illegal overnight. What you've got is a few ultra-liberals who want to impose their beliefs on everybody else. Now, the silence about how to enforce it's not reassuring. It opens the door to exactly the kind of heavy-handed enforcement Americans have long rejected. The forced surrender, even door-to-door confiscation of legally acquired property. And the Democrats are pushing hard for that. I think we're seeing the end of the Democratic Party as we know it. Well, the State Department has fired back at accusations of empty planes rescuing Americans from conflict zones. The State Department account of its evacuation efforts is at odds with on-the-ground reports from private rescue teams helped extract U.S. citizens from conflict zones during the opening days of the U.S.-Iran conflict. Brian Stern, founder and CEO of Gray Bull Rescue, a nonprofit evacuation service, is contesting claims that the State Department offered assistance to every American who asked for it, asserting instead that thousands of U.S. citizens were left trapped by missiles and bomb security threats crowding airspace in the region. He said it's not for lack of effort. Our State Department colleagues were tremendous, but their process doesn't work. And there's no job specialty, Stern told Fox News, noting a lack of a dedicated government position for handling evacuations. The contrasting assertions raise questions about the logistical efficiency of Americans' rescue effort, while prompting calls from lawmakers for more specialization to get U.S. citizens out of conflict zones in the future. There's, unfortunately, a lot of Americans in almost every country in the world. And unfortunately, a lot of them are now targets. Well, now a woman has died following a hernia repair after nurses dismissed her painful post-surgery symptoms. She died after a routine hernia repair. She suffered from an infection and deadly constipation symptoms that hospital staff brushed off as normal, according to her family's lawsuit against a surgeon and two registered nurses. Laura Belt, 46, died in May of 2024 due to complications linked to a bowel perforation that resulted in sepsis. Issues are allegedly missed by the staff at Decatur County Hospital, according to the Iowa Capitol Dispatch. The family is suing Dr. Edwin Vincent Welling and nurses Brandy Osh and Tammy Roberts for medical malpractice at Decatur County Hospital, which is also named as a defendant in the lawsuit. The Iowa Board of Medicine has also charged Welling with professional incompetency and practicing in a manner that's harmful and detrimental to the public. A board hearing on the disciplinary charges is scheduled for September. Well, Iran has issued a threat after President Trump plans to guide ships through the Strait of Hormuz. The fragile ceasefire with Iran faces its biggest threat to date as President Trump announced plans for U.S. forces to guide vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. blockade on Iranian ports will continue, with U.S. Central Command saying they've already redirected at least 49 ships. British military's Maritime Trade Center reported an attack on a trade vessel by multiple small craft just 11 miles off Iran's coast in the strait on Sunday. Iran's military has vowed to attack any U.S. forces that enter the strait. Peace talks with Iran remain stagnant, with President Trump bashing Iran's latest 14-point proposal. Central Command denied reports Iranian missiles struck U.S. Navy ships. The command claims that says that Iran's claims they struck the U.S. vessel with missiles straight over Hormuz are propaganda and false. CENTCOM spokesman Captain Tim Hawkins issued that denial in a statement to Fox News Monday. They made it up. It's not true. They had claimed 2 Iranian missiles hit an unidentified U.S. vessel near the port of Jask. Well, they're determined to fight to the last man, apparently. Well, a shooting during a party at Oklahoma's Arcadia Lake leaves at least 10 wounded, according to police. It was during a party at a lake near Oklahoma City. Edmond police responded Sunday evening after receiving multiple reports of shots fired at about 9 p.m. It took place at a gathering near Arcadia Lake, according to the department spokesperson Emily Ward. No arrests have been made in connection with the shooting as of late Sunday, but Ward said there was no known threat to the public. He said, "We're kind of all over the metro, speaking of victims and witnesses. In addition to the 10 people transported to hospitals by emergency responders," Ward said more drove themselves to hospitals for medical evaluations. Victims were admitted to hospitals in various conditions, some minor, some serious. Ward said the party where the shooting was reported featured a large group of people who believed to be young adults. And apparently some were carrying weapons. Well, the Iranian blockade is going global. And that's a warning signal to China and Russia. On Tuesday, U.S. Marines from USS Tripoli once again fast-roped from their M860 Seahawk helicopters onto the deck of a suspicious container ship called the Blue Star 3, which was heading for Iran. It makes a total of 39 vessels turned back, boarded, or seized since April 13th. According to President Trump, the blockade has been unbelievably effective. He said economic pressure is the main point of the blockade, but it has military impact far beyond the Strait of Hormuz. We seized their sanctioned ships, and we'll seize more, according to Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. Our blockade is growing and going global. Now, going global is sending shockwaves through China. China imports at least 70% of its oil. And of that, 90% moves by sea. Iran alone supplied 14% of China's imports last year, with Russia adding another 18%. Most of that oil was moved by what's known as shadow fleet tankers. For all the talk of China's growing naval power, the sea power phase of Operation Epic Fury is an incredible boost to deterrence in the Pacific. Tactics and joint force coordination on display are not something China can easily match. The web of air and maritime surveillance intelligence, financial forensics, and sheer audacity is something only America could pull off. Well, there's quite a number of ships, as I said, that have been boarded. Just a prime example is the merchant vessel Tuska. The drama began in the wee hours of Sunday, April 19th, when the Iranian flying container ship merchant vessel Tuska tried to enter the Strait of Hormuz and reach the Iranian port of Bandar Abbas. It was pedaled to the metal in merchant ship terms, steaming at 17 knots under the cover of darkness. Lying in wait was the U.S. Navy guided missile destroyer USS Spruance. Spruance already caught a different Iranian ship sneaking out of the strait 5 days before, and Tuska was highly visible. At 9 a.m., after multiple warnings, Spruce fired 9 inert 5-inch shells into the engine room, leaving Tuska dead in the water. At 4 p.m., U.S. Marines from the amphibious ship USS Tripoli air assaulted onto Tuska and took the ship and crew into custody. Well, out of control, unqualified illegal alien truckers are endangering kids on U.S. roads, according to insiders. Just madness. Several states have, if you can physically get there, you can get a commercial driver's license. You don't have to read or speak or understand English. The trucking industry insiders warning about a deadly danger rampant on the U.S. highways. And that danger, of course, is unqualified, untrained commercial truckers, many of whom are illegal immigrants and can't read basic road signs. Interview with Fox News Digital, Mike Kucharski, co-owner and vice president of Illinois-based JKC Trucking, issued an appeal for more investigations into the problem, says this is just madness. You wouldn't put somebody in the cockpit of a Boeing 737 flying from New York to California if they weren't properly trained or could communicate clearly or speak English. Same standards should apply to our highways. Every day, truck drivers are driving alongside school buses and families and commuters just trying to get into work and back home safely. When unqualified drivers slip through the cracks, this creates a risk to our motoring public. And you can see that there's been accidents all the time and quite a number of deaths. And let's see what else we got. Well, a United flight carrying 221 passengers hit a pole in a truck on approach to Newark. Now, all 221 passengers and 10 crew were unharmed, and a tractor-trailer driver was hospitalized. The international flight struck a light pole and a tractor-trailer while approaching Newark Liberty International Airport on Sunday, injuring a truck driver on the ground. Flight 169, traveling from Venice, Italy to New Jersey, made contact with the pole during its descent at about 2 p.m. That's according to the airline. The plane landed safely and taxied to the gate. All 221 passengers and 10 crew members were unharmed, as I said. Upon its final approach into Newark International Airport, United Flight 169 came into contact with the pole during its descent. The aircraft landed safely, taxied to the gate, and everybody deplaned. United said its maintenance teams are inspecting the aircraft possible damage and conducting a full safety review. Crew members on board have been temporarily removed from service. New Jersey State Police said troopers responded at about 1:58 p.m. near the New Jersey Turnpike. The plane's landing gear and underside struck a pole and a tractor-trailer, sending the pole into a Jeep traveling on the highway. Tractor-trailer driver was taken to the hospital with 9 life-threatening injuries. Didn't say what happened to the Jeep. Well, a cruise ship has had an outbreak of what's believed to be hantavirus. It's left 3 people dead as officials delay medical evacuations and probe the hantavirus threat. It was aboard a cruise ship in the Atlantic. It's left 3 people dead and several others ill, according to the World Health Organization. The UN Health Agency says the 1 case of hantavirus infection has been laboratory confirmed. 5 additional suspected cases are pending. Of the 6 people affected, 3 have died and 1's currently in intensive care in South Africa. The WHO, World Health Organization, don't you know, said it's coordinating with the governments and ship operators to arrange the medical evacuation of 2 symptomatic passengers. We're continuing to assess the public health risk to those still on board. Detailed investigations are ongoing, including further laboratory testing and epidemiological investigations. Medical care and support are being provided to crew and passengers. Sequencing of the virus is also ongoing. Well, the outbreak is linked to the MV Hondias, Dutch flag cruise ship sailing in the Atlantic off the coast of West Africa. Oceanwide Expeditions operates the vessel, confirmed that 3 passengers died during the voyage and 1 passenger is being treated in intensive care in Johannesburg. Crew members on board also require urgent medical care. The question is how the disease came on board. Well, a man is accused of biting an infant during an erratic dash through businesses before He was arrested at a restaurant. Memphis man is accused of biting an infant on the face and running through multiple locations while claiming his family is trying to kill him. That's according to a Tennessee affidavit. Jerry Stark, 34, is charged with domestic assault during the early May 1st incident, which unfolded across several locations while ending up at a restaurant North Hollywood Street. An affidavit obtained by Fox News states that officers responded to a call at Memphis Wings just before 1 a.m. They found Stark inside the business, screaming and panicking while holding the child. Witnesses told police Stark had been running through the area with the infant, asking for help, at times shouting his family was trying to kill him. Before arriving at the restaurant, Stark was seen at multiple nearby locations, including 2 gas stations, where witnesses said he was carrying the infant and behaving erratically. Then he ran southbound along North Hollywood Street toward the restaurant. Inside the business, witnesses said he laid down on the kitchen floor with the infant while continuing to shout for help. Several people attempted to intervene after noticing the child appeared to be in distress, telling police the infant was being squeezed and began turning blue. One witness told police that when Stark was asked what was wrong, he said, "My family's trying to kill me." Well, I guess you could say he was having a bad day. John Ossoff is silent on the Southern Poverty Law Center indictment after taking more than $700,000 from an affiliate of the indicted group. Federal prosecutors' stunning indictment of a left-wing activist group for alleged financial crimes is reverberating in Georgia's 2026 Senate race. Republicans are targeting Senator John Ossoff, Democrat of Georgia, for his past ties to that organization. The Department of Justice brought criminal charges against the Southern Poverty Law Center in April for allegedly defrauding its donors by secretly transferring money to extremist groups with the goal of infiltrating and monitoring their activities. Ossoff, the most vulnerable Senate Democrat running for re-election in 2024, is endorsed by the Law Center's 501c4 arm. The group contributed more than $700,000 to his campaign account in 2020, according to the Federal Election Commission FEC filings. Georgia Democrats also praised the group's purported efforts to combat racism. Well, been a lot of mixed stories about the Southern Poverty Law Center. Marco Rubio spotted behind the DJ booth at a family wedding as social media reacts to a viral clip. Secretary of State Marco Rubio is going viral, not for diplomacy, but for stepping behind a DJ booth at a family wedding and hyping up the crowd in a clip shared online that's gaining a lot of attention. The video, posted by White House Deputy Chief of Staff Dan Scavino on X, shows Rubio wearing headphones and standing behind a DJ setup, leaning over the controls as music plays and guests dance nearby. At several points, he pumps his fist, nods along to the beat, and appears to cue up the next track, drawing cheers from people gathered around the booth. Well, that just goes to show that Rubio is multi-talented, I guess. Well, there have been quite a lot of interesting things going on. Spirit Airlines has collapsed. They were going to join with JetBlue, but that didn't come to pass. Jodie Sweetin shares a shocking Full House residual check amount despite the show's mega success. Some folks get just a few cents, others get millions of dollars. It's fascinating to watch how it goes. Doing an appearance on the McBride Rewind podcast, the 44-year-old actress who earned stardom from her role as Stephanie Tanner during the show's 8-season run from 1987 to 1995. Then again in the spinoff Fuller House from 2016 to 2020, shared the shocking amount she received from a residual check. She said, "I got a 1-cent check the other day. There's no syndication anymore because everything is streaming. Who gets paid for that? Nobody." Well, on that note, let's go to our topic for today. We have been talking about a lot of interesting topics. We're going to talk about an unsolved mystery It revolves around a doctor. It's about 9 p.m. 28-year-old called home to tell her husband she'd gotten a raise. He congratulated her on the good news before she told him she'd be finishing her nursing shift in the healthcare facility where she worked part-time. It was fantastic news for the couple. The extra income would make providing for their 2 children somewhat easier. An hour and a half later, at about 11 p.m., she said good night to her fellow nurses, headed out into the parking lot to her Jeep, began driving back home. She made that same commute to and from work every day, driving back and forth along that same route. This night was no different. One co-worker said Luna, that was her name, drove behind her for a few minutes after leaving the office. It was rainy and foggy that night, and it wasn't long before she lost track of Luna on the dark, slick roads. Now, the drive from the nursing facility to Luna's home was about 12 to 15 miles, or about 20 minutes driving time. Her husband expected her home by 11:25. Usually stayed up to greet her. She came through the door, but on that particular night, she didn't show up. It wasn't entirely unusual for her to have her shift extended on short notice, either to cover another nurse or because a patient needed urgent care. So initially, the husband wasn't concerned in his wife's absence. Didn't even bother to call the hospital to make sure she was actually still there. He just went to bed. Well, he later recounted he woke up at about 2 in the morning and noticed his wife still wasn't home. But again, because of the erratic nature of her job, he simply went back to bed, assuming that there'd been some kind of emergency. Next morning, he woke up about 6 in the morning to find that she still hadn't come home. Called the hospital and told she'd left at 11 the previous night. So then he called Luna's mother and asked if she'd stayed over at her place. The mother had only just come back from vacation, so it seemed only logical Luna had driven to her mother's that night. But the mother said she hadn't heard from her daughter at all since arriving back in the state. It was at that point the mother and the husband began to think something might be wrong. The husband also called Luna's friends to see if any of them had seen her. Now, in any missing person investigation, the first 48 hours are the most important. And with any luck, he thought he might locate her before anything inconvenient occurred. One of her friends, named Karina, recalled getting a voicemail from Robert about 1 in the morning that day. 1 in the afternoon that day, saying, it's Robert, we're having trouble locating Luna. If you heard from her, please call me. Karina had since stated the first thing that struck her about the voicemail was Robert's unusual tone for a man whose wife had been missing for over 12 hours. At that point, she said he sounded remarkably indifferent. You'd expect him to be panicking and anxious, but he just sounded almost resigned to the fact he couldn't find her. Only a day into the search, and he sounded like he'd given up. Karina had been so vocal that Robert didn't sound concerned in his voicemail. She wondered why he didn't contact her earlier in the morning before Luna was reported missing. She's one of Luna's best friends, and Luna stayed the night with her before. Karina also noted Robert was rather controlling sometimes, and Luna talked about him, checking up on her frequently if she went anywhere without him. And her friends got together to walk the route she had driven home that night, keeping her eyes peeled for any sign of her or her Jeep. Her friends thought maybe because it was raining, she had taken an alternate route due to poor weather, but since they knew exactly which short road she'd have turned down, they figured that they'd find her in her car right away, but they didn't see a single sign of her or her vehicle along the entire route. Law enforcement initially speculated it had simply been some kind of automobile accident. Now, given that Luna seemed to have disappeared while driving, officers were told to keep a sharp eye out for a black Jeep while they conducted a foot search covering a 12-mile radius. Their search penetrated deep into the woods, covering every home, road, and body of water where she could have possibly ended up. Even helicopters called in to search, but not a single shred of evidence was ever located. Something that mystified the officers of such an intense and rigorous search, although relatively rare back then, was that Luna had a car phone installed in her Jeep. But then when officers tried to trace the phone's location, they found that the phone wasn't reachable. They also discovered Luna's purse had been left at home, implying she'd forgotten to take it to work that day. This also struck her friends as unusual. Her life was in that purse. Even if she'd forgotten it, she'd have probably turned around to go back and get it. Made him suspect she'd actually gotten home that night and something had occurred after her arrival at home that caused her disappearance. Investigators were able to pull only one security camera tape from the area where she was last seen. And one senior investigator later said, "We can't say for sure if it's the same vehicle, but it seemed to be, as the quality of the video wasn't good enough. Appears to leave at the time that she would have ended work." Well, in all the years since her disappearance, the police have investigated well over 1,000 leads. Not a single one of them has ever led to an arrest or court conviction. A lot of folks to investigate. No direct link to her disappearance, according to officers. Now, clearly, they suspected foul play. It's clearly a very frustrating case for them because there's no solid leads to follow up in regard to the case. Luna and Robert had their first child, a baby girl, but within a year, rumors spread that Luna was planning on leaving Robert's baby girl with her. Luna and Robert, shortly after Luna discovered she was pregnant with her second child, who she actually went ahead and gave birth to, started building the house of her dreams. But when Luna vanished, neither Robert nor his family actively searched for her outside of a few phone calls. And they didn't appear too emotionally shaken up about it either. Robert claimed he was perfectly cooperative during the investigation, contributed financially to a private search effort. But several people argued his monetary donations to Luna's search were pitiful. Contradict those claims. People appealed to that for a man who came forward from a wealthy background. His donation was just a few $1,000s. Everybody thought there was something definitely off. A few months after the media circus surrounding her disappearance had died down, representatives of the popular show reached out to Robert to book an appearance characteristically. He declined, but Luna's circle of close friends jumped at the offer of re-exposing her case to the public. After all, anything that might produce new leads or clues was worth the effort. And they resented the fact that Robert turned his back on such an opportunity. And then the show attempted to arrange an interview with him at his home again. He declined, but the wall of silence had been so prevailing at that point. Robert's father agreed to take part in a segment that aired later that year. He told him he firmly believed his son had no involvement in his wife's disappearance, and it would have been easy for somebody to dispose of that Jeep in order to remove any potential sign of a crime. During the same segment, his police investigator revealed that Robert had partially completed a lie detector test during the initial investigation. But his father pulled him out of it under the advice of an attorney. And that was highly suspicious, but considering how inaccurate the test can be and how a faulty reading could be used to gain a false conviction, Robert's father had every right to stop the test. Different theories, according to the police and a lot of folks, but nothing has ever come of the case. It's still an unsolved, mysterious case. They had absolutely no idea what happened to her after she disappeared into the mist and the fog. Well, we're going to turn from the missing Luna to another unsolved case involving a young lady by the name of Emma. Right from when she was a child, she had a thrill spirit. She played and smiled with everybody, and her mother, Shelley Phillip Off, made sure her daughter didn't hide that pretty side of her. Like most other children, she grew up with her family in the small town of Perth, Ontario. Her mother worked as a teacher. Her father, James Phillip Off, worked as an artist. She had two brothers, one older and one younger. They were named Matthew and Alexander, and an older sister named Erica. Everybody knew Emma talked about how free-spirited she was, and while a few others talked about her photography skills and a love of long walks. Similarly, her friends had the same thing to say. They described her as a lover of life, an intensely loyal young woman with a brilliant sense of humor. To document her own life, Emma kept a journal, some of which her mother had kept to this day. Emma and her brother Alexander shared a close relationship. Even though she loved her mother, Shelley described their relationship as guarded. And this was because Shelley constantly disciplined Emma for her behavior. Well, in love with independence, Emma moved to Victoria in 2011. Before she moved, she lived in Campbell River while also being involved in that intensive cooking program. Moved back and forth between Perth and the West Coast before finally settling in Victoria. And in Victoria, Emma moved from spot to spot, hanging in friends' apartments, staying in boats, and on one occasion sleeping in a tree. And to survive, she took several jobs, including a coffee shop that she quit after a while. Right before she disappeared, she worked at the Red Fish Blue Fish, a popular spot in downtown Victoria. Now, by all accounts, she had an exciting life, one that attracted several types of people. Even her closest friends had concerns, but these weren't enough to get anybody worried. Before her disappearance, a close friend said Emma had stayed on their boat for a few days, and during that time she seemed very happy. But after her disappearance, her friends admitted that it looked like Emma was running away from something or somebody. November 28, 2012, Emma vanished under the most mysterious circumstances. At first glance, it looked like the usual case of a missing person. But as investigations began, it was maybe one of the most confusing cases in recent times. As soon as the investigations began, security footage showed Emma entering and leaving a building in downtown Victoria. Now, the video, of course, lacked HD quality, making it hard to see exactly what Emma had in her hands, and some investigators argued that it was a mobile phone. Others say she was just fidgeting with her hands. Mobile phone or not, it looked like something was wrong. Like Emma, the free-spirited young woman was running from something, but nobody knew what. Next day, Emma called a tow truck company and asked if she needed to pick up her Mazda MPV van in Victoria. But in the tow truck, Emma told the driver she was going to surprise her family by moving back fully to Ontario. After 2 days, she called her mother by midnight, crying profusely and pleading that she wanted to come back home. Despite her mother asking, she refused to say what made her upset. Finally, Emma convinced her mother to book a flight to Victoria to pick her up, only for her to call back the next day saying she could figure things out on her own. But later that evening, Emma called again, upset and in tears, asking her mother to fly to Victoria and pick her up. But then again, Emma called the next morning and asked her mother not to worry, adding she could figure things out on her own. On November 27th, a few days after her first call, Shelley called Emma through that same number, only for somebody from a shelter to pick her up. For one, Shelley had no idea that her daughter was staying in a shelter, and second, where was Emma? Unsurprisingly, Emma called later that night and pleaded with her mother to come to Victoria and get her. Well, generally worried this time, Shelley did book a flight to Victoria for the next day. Again, Emma called the next day, telling her mother she shouldn't bother about traveling, adding she had figured things out on her own. But Shelley had had enough, and she flew to Victoria regardless. It was November 28th. Shelley had booked a flight to Victoria. In Victoria, Emma buys a prepaid credit card for $200 and a prepaid cell phone. Later on, she gets into a cab and asks to be taken to the airport. But as soon as she hears the fare is going to be $60, she changes her mind, complaining it was too expensive. Now, that was odd, as Emma had over $2,000 in one of her bank accounts. So how couldn't she afford the $60 to go to the airport? Later, around 7 p.m. that same day, Emma ran into a man called Dennis Quay while walking down the streets in downtown Victoria. Quay was worried about Emma's safety. This caused him to call the police. When the police arrived, they talked to Emma, decided she was fine. They left, leaving Emma in the open, standing in her bare feet. Just a few minutes later, Emma disappeared. A few hours after her disappearance, her mother arrived in Victoria. Unable to reach Emma after a few hours, she reported to the police that Emma had disappeared. And at that point, she was declared a missing person. Well, the police swung into action, checked her truck, and found her laptop, a camera, her journals, and her passport. Then he moved to the waters, involving a dive team that scoured and searched for Emma's body. And Shelley, who was now distraught, put together a search party made up of volunteers and searched the streets of Victoria to try to find her daughter. Unfortunately, despite the efforts of volunteers, Emma was nowhere to be found. Aside from an unconfirmed sighting from random people, it appeared like Emma had vanished off the face of the earth. But her mother wouldn't give up. Over the next few days, she put up posters and spoke to people who had seen her daughter. At one point, she traveled to downtown Victoria, where her daughter frequently stayed, silently praying that somebody had valuable information about her. Then a few days later, on the 5th of December, the prepaid credit card of $200 was flagged for use somewhere close to the Juan de Fuca Recreation Center, which is about 12 kilometers from downtown Victoria. Police rushed to the scene and arrested the man who had the card. Taken in for questioning, he confessed he found the card at the Juan de Fuca Center. After the police released him, that man consistently called Shelley, saying he wasn't sure where he found the card. He added he was an alcoholic, which explained why he couldn't remember where he found the card. Well, nothing was happening in Victoria, and Shelley and her family were getting increasingly impatient, so they extended their search to Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands. Unfortunately, despite the search expansion and unlimited leads, Emma remained missing, and these tips led to a brick wall. Everything remained hopeless until a year and 6 months later, May 2014, when a man was caught on security footage walking with a Comfort postal vendor. Got into a store and told the storekeeper Emma was his girlfriend and she wanted to be left alone. Well, that storekeeper called 911 immediately. Police arrived the next day and the man was gone by that time. The man was wearing a green shirt with tattoos scattered all over his arms, and he walked with an obvious limp. He's never been found. Years passed till the search turned cold with police archives. As expected, Emma's case became a popular subject in pop culture. Stories appeared in magazines and articles and podcasts. And that was all because her mother never stopped talking about Emma's disappearance. Regrettably, this attention did more harm than good in the end. In 2016, Shelley and her son Matt were in the news for something else: drugs and weapon offenses. Eventually, these charges were withdrawn against Shelley after the police found proof that she had no idea her son was keeping cocaine and weapons in her house. Of course, this caused a serious backlash from the public, unfortunately putting the story of Emma in the background. To date, Emma remains missing. Nobody knows if she's alive or dead, making her disappearance even more mysterious today. Well, there's been a lot of stories, unsolved stories, and you never know what you're going to find out in stories of this type. There have been quite a number of unsolved mysteries along the border. In fact, I've written several books about it. You can find them if you go to Amazon Kindle. Look up Ken Hudnall. I'm working on my 139th book. Well, now we're going to talk about stories of the paranormal. The Enfield horror. Spring of 1973. Small rural town of Enfield, Illinois was thrust into a storm of fear and fascination when a bizarre creature emerged from the darkness. Something so alien and terrifying, even the seasoned locals found themselves locking doors and keeping lights on through the night. The story began April 25th, 1973. A young boy named Greg Garrett claimed he was playing in his backyard when a hideous creature charged him out of the shadows. Described it as short and muscular with grayish-pink skin, 2 red glowing eyes, and 3 legs that thudded unevenly against the earth as it moved. Well, as you might suspect, the boy fled in terror, claiming the creature had shredded his shoes with razor-sharp claws. Minutes later, and a short distance away, Henry McDaniel, a World War II veteran, heard scratching at his front door. Thinking it was a stray animal, he opened the front door and had to come face to face with a creature later described as something from another world. He said it was about 5 feet tall, had short arms, glowing pinkish red eyes, and those same bizarre 3 legs. The creature hissed at him before it bounded away at unnatural speed. McDaniel, who was a cautious individual, apparently fired his pistol at the beast, but it escaped. Left behind deep claw marks and strange footprints with 6 toe pads and 3 distinct indentations. But the local police, as you might expect, were initially skeptical. They investigated and confirmed the unusual tracks, noting their odd size and depth in the earth. Over the next few weeks, other residents came forward with similar stories. Unsettling howls at night, livestock spooked or missing, glimpses of something unnatural hiding at the edge of the fields. Rumors, of course, swirled, ranging from escaped exotic animals to extraterrestrial visitation. But as usual, nothing concrete was ever found. The infield horror, as it came to be known, vanished as quickly as it appeared, left behind a trail of panic, newspaper headlines, and unanswered questions. But decades later, the legend of the infield horror still haunts Enfield, a strange chapter in American cryptid lore that began with a knock on the door and ended in silence. The creature was never seen again, but never truly forgotten either. Well, from Enfield, Illinois, let's go to the Philippines. Sigmund in Cebu province. It was 2003. The tranquil rural communities of Cebu province in the Philippines were rocked by a surge of strange occurrences that many believed to be the work of the mythical Sigmund, sinister, otherworldly creature long feared in Visayan folklore. Began with a series of mysterious animal deaths, goats and chickens found lifeless in the early morning, their bodies unmarked except for 2 small puncture wounds at the neck, completely drained of blood. Locals were baffled and terrified, and whispers spread this was no ordinary predator. Then came the sighting, fleeting glimpses of a creature slinking through the shadows at dusk, described as walking backward on all fours, with long ears that drooped to the ground, bulging red eyes, and a gait that was both insect-like and unnaturally fast. Children talked about a strange smell in the air, sweet and rotten, sound of soft clicking footprints on rooftops at night. One elderly woman claimed she saw the Sigmund leap over a bamboo fence in a single bound, carrying something limp in its jaws. Families began placing garlic and salt around their homes, and some even slept with sharp knives under their pillows. Traditional wards against creatures like this. As fear mounted, barangay officials and curious outsiders attempted to investigate. Found nothing beyond more dead animals and the occasional odd track, small hoof-like impressions too widely spaced for a known species. Catholic Church got involved. They warned against falling into superstition, but even the most skeptical priest hesitated to dismiss what had become a growing panic. Elders recalled stories passed down from their grandparents of the Sigmund emerging during Holy Week or when the moon was low, that feeds on blood and stealing children's shadows to use in dark rituals. Though the sightings gradually faded and the killing stopped as abruptly as they began, the memory of that year lingered like a scar in the community's collective psyche. To this day, those who lived through the 2003 events in Cebu talk of the Sigmund not as myth or metaphor, but as something very real, something that once walked among them under the cover of night and might one day return. Well, from the Philippines, let's go to 1764 France. The Beast of Gavardon. It was the summer of 1764. The quiet pastoral region of Gavardon in southern France was thrust into a nightmare that would grip the entire region, and in fact the entire nation, with terror. The emergence of a monster predator that locals soon called Le Bête, the Beast of Gavardon, began with a 14-year-old shepherdess was found savagely mutilated in the countryside near Langon, body torn apart with such violence even hardened hunters recoiled at the scene. Within weeks, more attacks followed, women and children mostly. Many found with their throats ripped out or limbs torn from their bodies, some partially devoured, others seemingly killed and left behind. Survivors who glimpsed the creature described it as wolf-like, but far larger than a wolf, with a broad chest, elongated head, reddish fur striped with black, and a long tail tipped with a tuft. Its eyes said to glow with a hellish light. Now, the attacks were relentless, often occurring in broad daylight, always with a shocking ferocity that suggested more than a simple animal. Panic spread through the villages, churches held mass funerals, and farmers refused to send their children into the fields. King Louis XV, under mounting public pressure, sent royal troops and professional wolf hunters to slay the creature. Their efforts failed as the creature continued its bloody rampage, often eluding traps and guns as though it possessed uncanny intelligence. Dozens of men combed the forest with muskets and hounds, but the killings persisted for over 3 years, with the death toll climbing to over 100. Theories abounded: a monstrous wolf, a hyena escaped from a nobleman's private menagerie, or even a werewolf or a demon sent by God to punish the wicked. Well, in 1767, a local hunter named Jean Castel claimed to have killed the creature with a silver bullet during a church-organized hunt, and the attacks did abruptly cease. And though his kill was paraded through the region, the body quickly decayed and was buried without scientific examination, leaving doubts to fester for centuries. To this day, the beast of Gavardon remains one of history's most chilling unsolved mysteries, a true terror that stalked the hills of 18th century France, leaving behind blood-soaked fields of mass hysteria and a legend that endures in the dark corners of European folklore. Well, the unfortunate thing is, with the creature dead, you have to take his word for the fact that he actually killed the beast. Then we got the Bat Squatch sightings in the U.S. in 1994. In the shadow of Washington State's Mount Rainier, a surreal and terrifying encounter with Ignite, one of the Pacific Northwest's strangest modern legends. Sighting of the creature now known as Bat Squatch. It's a crisp spring afternoon near the isolated town of Buckley, when a teenager named Brian Canfield is driving a quiet stretch of road through the forested foothills. Without warning, his truck engine died, stalling in the middle of the empty road. As he sat confused and trying to get the car started, a massive shadow descended from the sky and landed just ahead of the vehicle. Well, he froze as he watched that creature, which he described as a towering figure, at least 9 feet tall, with muscular limbs, broad shoulders, glowing red eyes, and enormous leathery wings folded against his back like those of a bat. Skin was bluish gray and lightly furred. Stood on clawed feet with long ape-like arms hanging low. The creature stared at him in eerie silence for what felt like several minutes, its breast visible in the cold air, before it unfurled its wings with a gust of wind and launched into the sky, vanishing into the canopy with a screech. Moments later, his truck restarted without explanation. Shaken and pale, he reported the encounter. A lot of folks dismissed it as a hoax or hallucination. And others noted the proximity to Mount Rainier, an area already steeped in UFO sightings and Bigfoot reports and military secrecy. The story gleaned traction among cryptid enthusiasts and conspiracy theorists alike, with some speculating the creature was the result of a secret government experiment or a being from another dimension drawn to the volcanic energy of the region. Though no other encounters of such intensity have been reported, there have been occasional reports of a winged humanoid in the Pacific Northwest. They've continued to surface. The legend of Bat Squatch remains a modern myth, whispered around campfires and online forums. Bizarre intersection of primal fear and high strangeness still haunts the forest of Washington like a living shadow with wings. Then let's go to the Congo, the 1980s. Mokele-Mbembe river disturbance. In the dense, steamy heart of the Congo Basin during the early 1980s, in the unexplored reaches of the Lakula swamps, a team of researchers led by cryptozoologist Roy Mackle embarked on an expedition that later stirred global curiosity and revived whispers of a living dinosaur. The elusive Mokele-Mbembe, long spoken of by the Baka and the other local tribes, the creature was described as larger than a hippopotamus, a long serpentine neck, a humpback, and a tail like that of a crocodile. Reddish-brown skin and herbivorous diet made it seem more myth than reality, but accounts remained strikingly consistent. During the expedition, while navigating a wide, sluggish bend in the river, the team witnessed a powerful and unnatural disturbance in the water. A massive wake followed by a heaving bulge on the surface as if something immense had just submerged. The boat rocked as ripples spread in all directions. The local guides grew visibly shaken, urging the team to remain quiet. One guide looked at him and said, "Mokele-Mbembe," pointing to where bubbles and the shadowy mass had just vanished beneath the murk. Over the next few days, the team found large, unexplained drag marks along the muddy riverbank, heard low, bellowing calls at night, calls unlike those of any known animal. Some villagers claimed to have seen the creature in the early morning mist, slowly wading through the water, grazing on vegetation. its long neck rising above the surface. Despite the lack of definitive photographic evidence, the sheer consistency and intensity of the sightings left the team both thrilled and unsettled. The scientific world remained skeptical, but the legend took on new life, fueled by the idea that in one of Earth's most remote and impenetrable ecosystems, something ancient and unknown might still roam. With those who witnessed the river disturbances firsthand, it wasn't just a story, it was a glimpse of a living mystery, a shadow from prehistory breaking the surface of time before vanishing once more into the green primeval silence. I've heard a number of stories about the Mokele Mbembe. There may well be something to it. Well, let's go to the Amazon. The year's 1907. We're going to talk about a giant snake. In 1907, deep within the vast, uncharted labyrinth of Brazil's Amazon rainforest, explorer Lieutenant Colonel Percy Fawcett reported an encounter with what would shock the scientific world and stoke one of the jungle's most enduring legends: the existence of a monstrous serpent of unimaginable size. While investigating a remote tributary of the Rio Negro during one of his early expeditions, Fawcett and his team came upon a sluggish bend in the river thick with floating debris and vines. Suddenly, that calm water erupted as a massive dark form surged to the surface. According to Fawcett's account, it was a snake, measured an estimated 60 feet in length and as thick as an oil drum. It rose from the water with a hiss like escaping steam, its eyes cold and yellow, its scales glistening black and bronze in the dappled light. The crew, gripped by panic, opened fired rifles as the creature attempted to slide onto the muddy bank. Its enormous body displaced water like a sinking boat. After several shots, it slid back into the depths and vanished with a final splash, leaving behind nothing but swirling water and stunned silence. Later on, the team claimed to have measured the carcass of a similar smaller specimen, still 24 feet long. Killed in a separate incident, locals confirmed the creature was known to them as the Sicarihu Gigante, the serpent feared for dragging cattle and even people into the water. And before you think there's no such thing as massive snakes, during one incident I had when I was in Panama, we were going down a road in the jungle. And if you think being in the forest is like being in the jungle, you're wrong. We ran over a snake. The head was in the bushes on one side of the road and tails in the bushes on the other side of the road. And all we did was piss it off with a 2-ton APC ran over it. Well, stories about these giant snakes have persisted for decades, told by indigenous tribes and jungle travelers. Some spoke of creatures so long as they were like boats, capable of crushing canoes with a single coil, dwelling in remote oxbow lakes and feeding under the cover of tangled vegetation. There's more strangeness to be found in the jungle than you can imagine. And on that note, we come to the end of today's show. We'll be back tomorrow and talk about more stories of the strange. Until then, this is Ken Hudnall for the Ken Hudnall Show, saying have a truly great evening.